Hi everyone, this is Robin Holman from NeuroChat Cat, and today's conversation we are going to be talking about postural stability in static stance. So let's talk about some of the terminology first that's used in the literature. We have our center of mass. COM, it is often abbreviated as. It is just as it sounds, the center location of where my mass meets. So if I took the average weight of my limbs and my trunk and my body, you'll find that that center of mass falls right around the umbilicus for most individuals. Now, I say most individuals because there are small outlying populations that may have, say, undergone bilateral transfemoral amputations or maybe suffer from severe obesity and their center of mass is not near the umbilicus, and because of that, they have to adapt their balance strategies in relation to that. Okay, so line of gravity, LOG. If I take a plumb line, which is basically a string with a weight on it, and I hold that string in the air, that line, the string, will point exactly to the earth, yes? And that line is actually a representation of a vector of the direction of gravitational forces upon the place that it's coming from. So in our case, the center of mass. The line of gravity is a demonstration of the direction of gravitational forces on the body. Now, Newton told us that there is no loss of energy and that every motion has an equal and opposite reaction. So if gravity is pulling down, we have ground reaction forces that are pushing right back up into us following that same line of gravity. Okay. Base of support. So if I'm standing on 2 feet, and let's say my feet are 10 inches long, and I'm standing in a stance 10 inches wide, then my base of support system from this position will be about 100 square inch. If I take a quad cane, put it in my hand, and in this case it is a wide base quad cane, and let's say it's 10 inches long, and I hold it 20 inches wide, we would say that our base of support system is now 200 square inch. If that line of gravity falls into my base of support, I'm going to be maintaining upright balance. Okay, so base of support's often abbreviated BOS, by the way. So there is some debate in the literature on the use of the word static stance, and the reason is because theorists argue that the phrase static stance is misleading because we actually don't ever stand statically still. Even when we're trying really, really hard, there is some natural sway that occurs, and we know that through works of putting individuals on forced platforms and detecting where their line of gravity fell over their base of support system. And so, for example, like the works of Doza in 2004, what you'll see, that's the base of support, those are 2 feet again, is that line of gravity falls anterior and posterior, medial and lateral, and it actually doesn't really look like beautiful figure eights like that. It looks a little bit more like squiggles. And you'll see that displacement in the sagittal plane is typically greater than that which is seen in the frontal plane. So there's a lot more anterior to posterior sway. And the reason is that has to do with the degrees of freedom at the ankle and at the hip. And so you'll see, and you can actually test this for yourself just by standing. And close your eyes, and you can feel that you will sway more anterior and posterior than medial lateral directions. Okay, so if we're moving in quiet stance, it means that we must be contracting something because we're moving and we're not falling, yes? And this can be explained by looking at where the line of gravity falls. All right, so if I'm standing in optimal posture, an optimal posture is defined as the position of the body that requires the least amount of energy expenditure to maintain equilibrium. It means that It's the most energy efficient position of the body and upright. It's our talus and our calcaneus. And our guy is going to have 3 digits because this is an art class. Oh, let's try some vertebrae in there. Okay. So, if I'm standing statically still or in quiet stance in optimal posture, that line of gravity is going to fall through the center mass. It will start at the mastoid process, just at it. It'll fall anterior to the spinal column, anterior to the acetabular femoral, anterior to the femoral tibial, and anterior to the talocrural joint. It's not perfectly straight. Oh well. Anyways, so if you were to measure EMG activity of the muscles on your body when you're standing in quiet stance, you will see, and this is supported by works through Kendall and McQuarrie and Williams and Wilkins, yes. You'll see an active triceps complex, which is the gastrocnemius and the soleus, activation of the anterior tibialis, activation of the glute med, of the tensor fascia lata, the paraspinals, and the abdominals. And it is explained through the line of gravity just by looking at the forces placed upon the joint. So let's start at the ankle first, yes? So let's say we have my ankle joint, and the line of gravity is falling, let's draw a different color, just anterior to that talocrural. And we know, because Newton told us every action has an equal opposite reaction, ground reaction forces are pushing back up. And so what's happening is that gravity wants to pull your tib and fib forward to dorsiflex, and it wants to take your hind foot and forefoot and pull it closer to the tib and the fib. Basically, it's going to try to produce a dorsiflexion at the ankle. So we must resist that. Otherwise, we will continue forward and you will fall. Hence, triceps complex activation. Every once in a while, the torque that we produce at the ankle joint exceeds the ground reaction forces and gravitational forces, and it requires just the opposite in order to reverse that direction, and that would be the intermittent anterior tibialis that we see. If you look at the knee joint, there are passive structures in the knee joint, like the ACL and the PCL, and the meniscal structures, and intrinsic muscle stiffness of muscles like the hamstrings and the gastrocnemius that will prevent the joint from flexing forward. So the flexion that happens at the knee joint is in the posterior direction. Because that line of gravity falls anterior, and because the passive structures stop it, you really don't need muscle activation to really prevent it from going further forward, which is supported in literature. You don't see a lot of activity in the quadriceps, and you don't see a lot of activity in the hamstrings in quiet stance. Moving up the chain at the acetabular femoral, we see an active glute med because it's resisting flexion of the hip. Interestingly, you don't see a lot of glute max. It is likely because the hip is already in extended position and it's actively insufficient. We see the line of gravity will encourage lumbar flexion, so paraspinals are active. And because of the same reasons that we see anterior tibialis active, we have intermittent abdominal activity. Tensor fascia lata, which helps to control the knee in an extended position, has a lot to do with the control of the medial to lateral sway, as well as the fact that we're using the glute med because it also helps to externally rotate that hip joint. Okay, so why is it evolutionally appropriate that we have sway? Because someone would say, well, man, if we evolved to be energy efficient, our line of gravity should fall through the joint lines so that we don't have to use anything to stand. We just stand statically still. Well, there's actually some beauty in our natural sway that occurs. And it has to do with the fact of sensory input to the central nervous system. We know that when there's a constant stimulus being applied to the central nervous system that doesn't change, our brain will naturally habituate to that response, as long as that stimulus is not increased or decreased. Because of the fact that the line of gravity is going to pull us forward and backward and forward and backward, we're getting constant input from those graviceptive vestibular apparatuses, the mechanical Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindle fibers, and even visually you're going to see the change of the input that tells us all the time, where is your body in space? If you think about an energy efficiency perspective, that natural sway front to back and side to side also provides for opportunity for the muscles to have a break, so they're not constantly contracting, so they don't fatigue as quickly. A perfect example of us trying to do that anyways would be if, say, you're standing in line at the grocery store, and the line's really long, and you're standing in one position, and you fatigue, so you switch to the other. And that just provides for those muscles an opportunity to relax so that you can complete the task for a longer period of time. So that is, in summary, in stance, we see gastrocnemius, the anterior tibialis, glute med, tensor fascia lata, paraspinals, and abdominals, so that we can maintain our upright position in static or quiet stance, so you can maintain that line of gravity in the base of support, so we do not fall.